Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this event. I will try over the next 50-55 minutes to take you on a little of a journey of what has happened in pain research, in particular in the last 20 years, which has really revolutionized our whole thinking about chronic pain. So if you think about pain, you are experiencing something which is unpleasant. It is also emotional. You are suffering from pain, and it is usually related to actual or potential tissue damage. You cut yourself, you burn yourself, you break your arm, and all of us learn, most often in early childhood, what pain is. And this pain is always a warning signal. So this was discovered very, very early. So there is a very early French philosopher and physiologist who describes pain as fire A touches foot B and something travels to the brain F in the same way as pulling a rope would ring a bell in the brain. And that's the alarm system. So it is fire alarm pretty much. So we have something in the periphery which is fire or a cut or a break. There is a receptor in our body, nociceptors, and they actually respond to this, receptors for noxious stimuli, and then they send a signal up to the brain, and in the brain we perceive pain. And this is a fire alarm in the same sense as a fire alarm, so it's threatening, it warns us that something is wrong. We do something to prevent it, take our hand from the hot plate, keep our fractured arm still or put it in a plaster of Paris until the injury has healed. And this simple, straightforward mechanism was actually thought to be all which is in pain, this simple rope, until in 1965 in Science there was a publication suggesting that there's a new theory about pain. And I don't want to go into the details of the theory, which was called the gate control theory, but luckily a very clever cartoonist made an Australian version of the gate control theory. So what that theory really says is that our entry into our nervous system has a limited capacity. And if we flood the entry with nice kangaroos, the nasty pain crocodiles can't get through. And if you think about it, we do that every time we injure ourselves. What do? We rub the area. So we do touch sensations into the same area and thereby block the pain sensations. Or if you ever, any of you is using a TENS machine, an electrical nerve stimulation device, it's using this. You're feeling a tingling sensation caused by the device, and that is actually blocking the nasty pain signals from reaching the spinal cord. But you see what that means. It means this is not really a rope. This is already the first modification, because it's not only depending on the injury, but depending on how your nervous system is dealing with it, how you are actually perceiving pain. And we know now that this is a much more complicated system. This was only discovered in 1965. Since then we have learned a lot. We have learned, for example, that if you take a placebo and you believe it is a painkiller, your expectation is activating descending pathways of pain control which stop your pain. And that's why in clinical trials of painkillers, placebos are always very, very effective, because you just need to expect that your pain is relieved and you can switch that on. The next one is exercise. And that is a big problem with chronic pain, because the more chronic pain you have, the less physically active you are, the less descending inhibition you have. And that's why we recommend, and I will finish this with my lecture, that everybody who has chronic pain should do some paced exercises, because it will improve pain control through strengthening these descending pathways of pain control. There is comfort, and that means relaxation, meditation, better sleep, which will activate descending pathways of pain control. And that's why we often use clinical psychologists to establish that. And then you will say, but how crazy, there is stress also. But stress is life or death stress, and you have possibly heard about that. You read novels about soldiers in the battlefield who have terrible injuries and they continue fighting and claim it doesn't hurt. We see that in the emergency department. People come in and they have really absolutely terrible injuries, and the first 30 or 40 minutes they say, I don't need a painkiller. And the reason is your life or death stress is, in evolution, you can imagine, you would survive better if you would actually run away from a danger or fight a danger and not feel pain. This is called stress-induced analgesia and is more or less the extreme. So there is severe nociception, but the nociception is blocked by the inhibition to the extent that people feel no pain. So the rope has been cut. And I'm using this as an example to illustrate there is no direct linkage between the injury and the pain. In these patients, the fire alarm is out of order and it doesn't go off despite the fact that they have severe injury. There is a big fire. Now, what that means is if we look at the systems and pain pathways, we have here the injury, fire, cut, whatever. Peripheral nerves send impulses to the brain. They go up through the spinal cord to the brain, and in the brain we feel the pain. But at the same time, we are able to send descending inhibition down, and this descending inhibition prevents the pain signals from getting through here, and the balance between the two is an important issue. And we think that actually in many chronic pain patients, there is either too much excitation or too little inhibition for many, many different reasons, and we will touch some of these. But that's already the first, more or less, harming the theory of the rope and the bell. The other area which harmed it then completely was a development of a concept called central sensitization, in particular by a very famous researcher, Clifford Wolf. And you see again, this is 1983, but in the end the final republication is somewhere here in 2007. So all happening very, very recently. And what central sensitization means is that if you have a pain, the nervous system can actually continue playing the pain when the injury has healed. And the most classical example, possibly many of you have heard about, is phantom limb pain, where patients have an amputation, maybe even above the knee, and they have excruciating pain in their big toe. And it might even feel like the gout attacks they had before the amputation. And what that is, there is no nociception, there is not even a leg anymore, but in the leg, through the CNS being so excited, there is a projection of pain. And the best analogy is a false fire alarm, because it's like that. The fire brigade headquarters gets the alarm, rushes out, and there is no fire. And this is pain caused by central sensitization without even a limb, but it can also occur all over our body or in our chronic back pain or whatever. And the problem is, because there is no fire, extinguishing the fire, operating, injecting, and so on, doesn't work very well, in the same way as the fire brigade will have to switch the wrong alarm off, but can't do anything because there is no fire in the periphery. And this has then further resulted in brain research, and for example in phantom limb pain, there is reorganization of the brain in phantom limb pain. So our brain is actually changing on top of the spinal cord in function when we have phantom limb pain. And one classical example is we have pain centers in our brain, and they are depicted here. If you have a chronic back pain, these pain centers become much bigger and more influential. So there is a spinal cord problem, not enough inhibition, too much excitation, and then there is a brain problem because our brain centers with continuous exposure to pain become more and more active and therefore represent more and more pain. So Homer Simpson was right, no brain, no pain, because what happens in our body is nociception, but what our brain makes out of it is what we then experience as pain. So even if we injure our foot, the brain is necessary to say, ouch, it hurts. Otherwise we wouldn't feel it. Everything before is what we call nociception, and that has nothing to do with pain. And as you saw, you can have no nociception and pain, and you can have lots of nociception and no pain. And therefore, if we look at it overall, we have the ascending pathway of pain control, which ends first in the thalamus, where we suffer, and goes then to the cortex, where we perceive its pain in my big toe. But at the same time, we have coming from the brain descending inhibition, and the balance between the two will determine how much of the pain information goes through. So if you have lots of excitation and not enough inhibition, it's like a car with the foot on the accelerator and no brake. So you will get faster and faster, and your pain will get worse and worse. On top of that, and that is even more recent discovery, we have in our spinal cord lots of so-called glia cells or astrocytes. They were thought to be actually the structural matter around the nerves, which works like a skeleton and keeps the spinal cord in shape. But we know now that glia activation drives the nervous system to become more sensitive to pain. And that is possibly one of the leading further problems in chronic pain patients, that their glia becomes hyperactive. They run around like crazy and they release lots of chemicals which drive the pain message. And that's one of the reasons, for example, why high-dose opioids in chronic pain don't work very well, because they activate glia and makes the central sensitization worse. And it's also why possibly drugs like PEA, some of you have heard about, which are reducing glia activation, are actually helpful for chronic pain. And there's at the moment a lot of interest in drugs interfering with glia. But the overall message, and this is the title of this lecture, and it was possibly formulated like that for the first time exactly 20 years ago by Alan Basbaum, an American neurophysiologist, is that acute pain is a symptom of something else in our body wrong. But chronic pain is a disease of the nervous system. And there doesn't have to be anything wrong in our body anymore. So if you look at it, the old paradigm for acute pain where something wrong in the body, like this clamp on your foot, the in signal goes up and you have pain. But in chronic or persistent pain, you have nothing wrong here anymore, but even the touch of a feather will now be enough input for our brain to be hypersensitive. And possibly, if you have seen patients with nerve pain, they often can't tolerate the touch of their shirt or the touch of their blanket at night, because touch in this hypersensitized nervous system becomes now so painful as if it would be fire or a knife or something like that. So you see, this is really the change. And the problem is that we are all used to that. Something hurts in our body, we think, oh my God, something is wrong. What do I do to protect myself? It's a threat. But in a lot of cases in chronic pain, there is nothing wrong, maybe other than the touch of a feather, but our nervous system plays such an overwhelming message to the brain that we perceive pain when there is nothing wrong. And the problem is, because we were always brought up to think if there is pain, we need to be careful and is a threat, we feel as threatened by this pain as by this one, and we do all the wrong things. We stop moving, which would help us. But of course we think, oh, my back is bad, I should better not move, I should protect it. But it doesn't make sense anymore, because it's actually the nervous system, and if it would teach it to function better, then it would be much better. And this, as I said, has really happened over the last 20 years. This is a very influential paper from 2004. Many of you possibly have heard about Michael Cousins, who was the leading pain researcher in Australia, just recently retired at the University of Sydney. And they published this paper, Persistent Pain as a Disease Entity, and correctly, this has implications for treatment. And I will take you through an example. Imagine you have chronic low back pain. So you feel pain here. Most chronic low back pain is in the lumbar area. If you think in the old model, you look into your body and you think, oh, there are all the vertebrae and all the discs and all the facet joints, and this is where my pain is coming from. And then your GP says, oh my God, you're in so much back pain, you need to get an MRI scan. And then you get an MRI scan. And the MRI scan usually of anybody reads like a horror story. It is really true. Look, this is a normal patient off the street who got an MRI scan, you know? And you have annular tears, you have disc bulges, you have desiccation, and you read it and you think, oh my God, my back is crumbling, I will be soon in a wheelchair. And that's the danger of MRI scans. Because if you actually look at statistics, and if you look at your pain like this, you have to think the annular tear, the disc bulge, the facet joint is the cause of my pain. But if you then do a MRI scan on healthy people and take somebody in my age group, then nearly 90% have disc degeneration. You know, nearly 70 or 80% have disc bulges, but not all of them have back pain. And that illustrates that what you find on an MRI scan has nearly never any correlation to the back pain a patient perceives. And what that means is that, for example, I'm now running the pain clinic of Royal Perth Hospital for 18 years. I think I've organized 2 MRI scans in 18 years because I refuse to do MRI scans if they find this, which you would find in a normal healthy population, and they don't help patients. And on the contrary, they might harm patients. Because think about it, you know, if you go away from the Descartes model of fire, rope, bell, and you think about peripheral sensitization, central sensitization, the glia cells, descending modulation, cortical plasticity in our brain, and other things, then you can imagine that there is no correlation whatsoever between an MRI scan of a back pain patient and the pain they have. And that is really, I think, one of the most important messages, and that's why my organization, the Faculty of Pain Medicine, is actually running a very aggressive campaign against unnecessary MRI scans, because A, they cost billions of dollars to our economy, B, they are, and this is a very nice title, worse than useless, because not only do they not show anything which you can treat, but they make patients extremely worried that something serious is wrong in their back. And they will think about, oh my God, I end in a wheelchair, oh my God, I can't walk again, I need surgery, and so on and so forth. And in lots of cases, you might even get surgery on the basis of an MRI scan, but very often it actually doesn't fix your pain. And this is why worse than useless is important, because there is a fascinating theory from a Belgian psychologist, Van Vleyen, the called of fear avoidance model. So you have an injury, you experience pain, you have torn your back. If you now say, oh, this can't be anything serious, I have no fear, I confront the pain, I exercise, you recover. But if you have the pain experience and then you think, oh my God, how bad is that? And then your GP gives you threatening illness information. You have a slipped disc, your MRI looks terrible. I have patients who tell me their orthopedic surgeon said to them, I've never seen such a terrible MRI scan as your one. Which doesn't make any sense, because people on the street would have the same MRI scan. But what that is, this creates more catastrophizing, more fear. You develop what we call kinesiophobia, the fear of movement. You avoid anything which you should actually do. You don't go to your pool anymore, you don't play golf anymore, you don't work anymore possibly, and thereby you get depressed, you get disabled, you get disuse of the muscles of your back, and then your back pain gets worse, and you go into this vicious cycle. And that's why I like this worse than useless, because they are not only helping us to determine what we need to treat, they're actually making patients scared and worried, and often doctors then use the wrong words. And you know, words like, you have to be careful, you are suffering from wear and tear, your back is damaged, you have a slipped disc, you have a disc bulge, your back is weak, you should avoid bending and lifting. What does it tell you? Oh my God, it's really dangerous, I should be more careful. Most people in my age have possibly 3 slipped discs, you know? And I don't know how many disc bulges on average. I wouldn't even want to see my MRI scan. But it doesn't have anything to do with pain. But if you get now these messages, then you are actually thinking, I need to move very carefully, I should stop my gym, I should possibly no longer work because it would harm me too much. And your pain will get worse and worse and worse. And that's why, for example, I like the International Association for the Study of Pain, which says back pain is exercise intolerance. And that's a much better word. It's not a disease, it's exercise intolerance. And that's why we try to tell people, if you talk to back pain patients, don't talk about slipped discs, about broken joints, about damage, because it is all threatening. Talk about relaxed movement will help your pain. If it hurts, relax, breathe, and move normally. Pain does not equal harm in chronic pain. If you have a broken arm in acute pain, pain equals harm. If you don't get a plaster of Paris, your broken arm will get worse. But if you are 3 months after an accident and your pain persists, it is most likely no longer caused by the accidents, but it is caused by what your nervous system has made out of it. And therefore, if you have chronic back pain, if you have fibromyalgia, pain is no harm or damage. And therefore, you should do whatever you like as long as you can control the pain. And the more you do, the better your pain will get, because you normalize your nervous system function. And that's another good word. Your back is sensitized, because that's exactly what it is. Central sensitization. Our nervous system becomes so sensitive, and I don't know if there are any people with fibromyalgia in the room, but that you are sensitive to light, you are sensitive to noise, you are sensitive to touch. Because the upregulation, the volume button on your amplifier has been turned to maximum. And therefore anything which goes in, touch, movement, noise, light, will be amplified and be overwhelmingly unpleasant and painful. But it is sensitization, not damage. And therefore, whatever your back pain problem is, nobody has ever broken their back when they have back pain. So whatever you want to do, you should do. And I have so many patients who tell me, oh my God, finally you say that to me. Now I can go back to my golf club. I can go back to my lawn bowling, because I was so scared that I shouldn't do certain things because they harm me. Lifestyle factors are important. Weight, exercise, nutrition can be very important. And scans don't tell you anything, honestly. And the only thing they tell you is they give you a very, very threatening message that something terrible is wrong in your back when there is nothing wrong. And if you are unlucky, you actually get a surgeon who says, oh, this is wrong, let's have an operation. And that's why, for example, our clinic nearly never refers to back surgery, and why the pain medicine faculty has one of the 5 things under choosing wisely is never do a spinal fusion for neuraxial back pain, because it will not work, because you are extinguishing a fire which is not the cause of the fire alarm. So if I try to put that into a frame, we have all acute pain all our life. And if we don't, like children who are born with no pain fibers, it's terrible. You're not Superman. You cut yourself and you don't notice it, so you will get more and more of an injury. You need a plastic surgeon. You overextend your joints and you break your bones and don't feel it. So don't wish that there are no pain fibers, because the children with no pain fibers are doing very poorly in life. Because we need the warning that if there is tissue damage, the pain gives us a protective function. And then the important thing is this pain will resolve upon healing. And the problem is, a lot of people think the pain can persist and still come from the injury. So I see patients that had a car accident in 1997. And the reason they have back pain, they tell me, is their car accident from 1997. But no injury in a human body wouldn't heal in, what, 22 years? So what that is, this is pain beyond the expected period of healing. Then it no longer serves a useful purpose. On the contrary, it's actually, if you think about it, harmful, because it prevents you from doing the things you should do to get better. There are changes in pain signaling and detection, central sensitization, and pain actually degrades health and function. Because if you don't move any longer, your muscles will get weaker, your pain will get worse. If you don't move any longer, you can't work, and therefore your family will suffer, and so on and so forth. If you don't go to your bowling club anymore, you lose your social contacts, and you will be sitting at home thinking about your pain and becoming very depressed. Because what I told you up to now is the pain in here. But surrounding this is, what do we think about the pain? And I've already mentioned the threat and the issues. What you then suffer as the psychological distress. What you show as illness behavior to your surrounding. And the social consequences, which can be catastrophic from chronic pain. You have to stop working because you think, I can't work anymore. You lose friends, family, and things like that. So yes, there is a biology, but even the biology is not what we think. It is not tissue injury, it is central sensitization, but it leads to a cascade of other consequences. And that's the reason why we are using the word a biopsychosocial model of chronic pain. because it is holistic. Our body is not only body. Our body is also our brain and our psychology and our social environment. And these diseases are affecting it all. So biopsychosocial is important. And if you think about it, I just list a few things. If you think about you have chronic back pain, you don't go to work anymore, the effects it has on your social life, what it means in your social context. For example, you don't work anymore, you feel you are a loser because you are not the breadwinner for your family anymore. And that makes you sad and depressed and has major other consequences. You have the psychological issues, and there are health and pain beliefs, and I hope I've changed some of these today so that you don't think chronic pain is a threat and chronic pain needs to be treated by rest, because then you can rest for the next 15 years and the only thing, it will get worse. Bed rest for back pain is one of the worst things you can do. It's harmful to back pain. Coping skills you can learn, and that's why we involve a lot of clinical psychologists in our treatment. You can talk about fears and concerns, and education can overcome it. You need to think about how do you deal with the pain emotionally, and you need to think that a lot of the transmitters which are in your central nervous system, which are looking after pain, are also involved, for example, in depression. And so it might be that there is an interaction, chronic pain causing depression, depression causing panic pain, and that's why you cannot look at these things in isolation. You have to do the holistic approach. And then on top of it, as I said, for chronic pain, most important central sensitization as a central process, but also previous pain experiences will more or less predispose how you deal with the pain. Because if you had one terrible experience from a surgery or something like that, it means you get pain again, you get extremely scared and worried. If you had a good experience, it might be the opposite. And clearly we know now, and this is only starting to be studied, that human beings have a genetic makeup which is different. And there are people who have strong descending pathways of pain control and people who have weak descending pathways of pain control. And that would also interplay with the balance. Because if you have already a genetically weak one, the moment there's too much excitation, you don't have a break, because it doesn't exist in these patients. So there are all these factors which have to be considered, and that's why we are always saying don't expect a miracle drug for chronic pain ever. You know, how much ever medical progress we will make, and the MRF might make amazing medical progress, there will be never a silver bullet for chronic pain. Because imagine, how would you create a drug which would treat all that? So it is really important that expectations from drugs in chronic pain are very limited. So what we are trying is we are trying something we call pain management and not treatment. And it's a little bit like if you have diabetes. Nobody in this world can yet treat diabetes. But we can either live with diabetes quite well, or we can have terrible consequences and live very poorly. And that depends on how well we manage it. And the same is true for chronic pain. We have no miracle cure, but how we manage it will result in better or worse quality of life and things like that. And what are these? First, we need functional goals. So don't say, I want to be pain-free, because nobody can give you that. But think about, you know, what can I do? Walk 10 meters 5 times a day might be a major achievement for you. And if you do that for a while, you can possibly walk 15 meters 5 times a day, and then 20, and so on and so forth. So make functional goals. Whenever you have chronic pain, think about hurt is not harm. So it is no longer an alarm signal. You do not have to reduce your activity because it hurts. If it hurts so much that you can't stand it, one has to find a solution. But if you say, oh my God, I need to be careful, you enter this vicious cycle of threat. Encourage self-management, and that's, for example, why all the patients who come to our pain clinic are referred, are first getting a course which is in 5 hours what I do here now in 1 hour, but more detailed with a psychologist, a physiotherapist, and a nurse. Nobody will ever see me on the first consultation. The first consultation is a group program to talk about self-management and self-efficacy. Incorporate appropriate psychological interventions, and in particular, get rid of catastrophic thinking. because catastrophic thinking will result in a fear avoidance behavior which will actually harm you. And then you need to talk about that, and you need to start with realistic expectations. So don't say, oh, tomorrow I can run a marathon. Not even a healthy person can do that. But if you say, I can walk to the letterbox, or I can go shopping, and you start with something simple, you make yourself a little goal, you achieve it, and then you fulfill these expectations and build up your use. What it also means is that there is nearly never one person alone who can help you. Only seeing a doctor for complex chronic pain more or less never works. Only doing physiotherapy nearly never works. So we are offering, or most clinics offering, multidisciplinary treatment because not a single thing will stop your pain. And this involves a team, which can be in some cases a physio, a clinical psychologist, sometimes even a psychiatrist if the mood disturbance is very severe, and a pain medicine specialist or an occupational therapist. So you have a team which addresses your body as a whole and not the pain and nothing else. And the pain probably won't go completely away. A central sensitized nervous system to get back to zero sensitization, we haven't achieved. We achieve it in some patients, but not very often. But we achieve in most patients that they can get on with daily living and normal function. So everybody says, but you can give me some drugs. And the first answer is, there is no good painkiller for chronic pain. So anything you take for acute pain, paracetamol, ibuprofen, naproxen, codeine, morphine, oxycodone, works perfectly for acute pain, and it's absolutely necessary. I've just come from a pain round where we looked after 45 patients post-operatively, and all of them get all these drugs because they have a surgeon who cut into them, they have a big holes in their body, and it hurts, and it's acute pain, and painkillers are fantastic. But the moment you have chronic pain, these drugs usually do not work at all. What we can do, we can sometimes use drugs which are interfering with the central sensitization. And I mentioned just very briefly, for example, excitation, overshooting excitation. Pregabalin is a drug which sometimes helps, gabapentin. We have very few people where we use ketamine because these three drugs are reducing central sensitization. So if a patient comes in and can't move at all, this is sometimes a way to actually get them to start moving a little bit. It will never fix their pain, but it will enable them to do things they couldn't do before. And the opposite is increasing descending inhibitions, so increased function of the inhibitory systems. And interestingly here, it's antidepressants which work like that, so amitriptyline, duloxetine, and some painkillers have an antidepressant-like effect which strengthens descending pathways of pain control. But again, this is not fixing it. It's not like acute pain because we don't have the simple target of the injury, the surgical cut. We have a complex target with multifactorial effects. And I can't go by without saying a few things about opioids, because you have possibly heard that Australia and New Zealand, Canada and the US are going through something which is called the opioid epidemic. And the reason is that everybody thinks, oh, I have back pain, I need opioids. I have more back pain, I need more opioids. So we have reached a situation where there are a number of countries which are in the red. Red is amazing amounts of opioid consumption per capita. And this started in the US, spread to Canada, spread to Australia, and a few European countries. In these countries, you go to a GP, you have back pain, you get an opioid. And people thought they're doing something good because opioids work so well in post-operative pain and in cancer pain. But they don't work in chronic back pain, and they don't work in fibromyalgia, and on the contrary, they might actually harm these patients. So what is the result? That there is too much opioid on the market, in the households, on the streets, and we have now the sad record that Perth has the highest per capita death rate from prescription opioids. And regrettably, this is still increasing. So this is from last August, the latest data from 2016, and there are still more people dying from opioids, and that's actually quite shocking, 1,045 patients, which is more than car accident victims, and 75% of them are from prescribed opioids. They are not from heroin and street drugs, they are from prescribed opioids. And you have possibly heard TV shows about fentanyl patches, oxycodone tablets, and the problems associated with this in Australia. But if you look at what it does to patients with chronic back pain, I've just here summarized 3 international randomized controlled trials. This is Canadian, unlikely to yield psychological or functional improvement in chronic back pain. German trial, only an insignificant improvement of quality of life as a result of morphine treatment of chronic back pain. And a US trial, opioid therapy is palliative and without long-term benefit for chronic back pain. So we are harming our society, but we are not helping our patients. And if you look here at a US report, evidence on long-term opioid therapy for chronic pain is very limited, risk of serious harm, which appears dose-dependent. And the higher the dose, the more the harm. And on top of that, we know now that if you give to chronic pain patients opioids, you do more harm. Opioid-induced hyperalgesia is nothing else, but you give an opioid and your central sensitization gets worse. And the more opioid you take, the more pain you get, and therefore you are actually not benefiting from this medication. You are actually, in the end, maintaining part of your chronic pain by taking opioids. Opioid-induced androgen depression means that if you are on long-term opioid, in particular in high doses, your testosterone levels will be usually 0. And I'm now measuring in a lot of my patients just to show them that their testosterone has gone down to 0, which is not only bad for your sexual function, which a lot of young men are very worried about when you mention that, but it also increases weight gain, depression, muscle weakness, and tiredness, which are all consequences of chronic pain. So the quality of life of these patients is actually getting worse. And we also know that opioids-induced immune dysfunction is there. There's, for example, very good evidence that the higher your opioid dose, the more likely you are to develop pneumonia, because the opioids inhibit your killer cells, which are there to defend your body from this problem. So that's why we are so much against opioids and are trying to reduce them. And I think, although this is very old, I was very worried about that very early. I was still working for the University of Auckland at that time. But what I still think is the right word is caring or crippling. Because you go to a doctor and the doctor is very caring and you say, I have excruciating pain, I can't move. And you get an opioid. And you get a little bit of pain relief and you come back and say, it's a little bit better. And you get double the dose. And you get a little bit better. But you never get right. But what at the same time happens is you are actually crippled by it. And that's why I think this title, although it's now so old, is still very valid today. Because caring doctors are crippling patients. And that's, I don't want to blame any of these doctors because they are trying their best. But by trying to do their best, they are actually crippling the patients they are looking after. So I want to come to an end here and summarize a little bit, hopefully, what I could show you. So if you have acute pain from a broken leg, from a sprained ankle, from a burned skin, this pain is a symptom of this disease or that injury. And therefore, it has a biological function. It is actually very important that you feel that pain because it is an alarm telling you something is seriously wrong in my body and I better put a plaster on, see a doctor, get an X-ray, or put a dressing on, or whatever. This pain responds extremely well to all the painkillers, and I'm sure you have all done that, taking paracetamol over the counter, ibuprofen or naproxen over the counter. Luckily, no longer codeine over the counter, because codeine is an opioid and causes all the problems you have heard about. But you might even go to your GP and they might give you 5 or 6 tablets of an opioid to cover the acute phase. And then the injury heals and the pain disappears in most people. But in some people, central sensitization has kicked in, and that can have many, many factors. I showed you some of them. And as a consequence, you actually get chronic pain, which continues after the healing has occurred. And this pain has no biological function anymore. It's more or less a nervous system, a computer software glitch. So you feel pain, but there is no fire, and therefore what you do is you behave as if there is a fire, but doing that doesn't help you. It actually harms you, because if you would move with back pain, you would get better. But if you don't move, you will get worse. It cannot be treated by painkillers well, and that's why so many failed attempts of treating chronic pain with drugs are failing. And very important, it cannot be seen on X-ray, CT or MRI scans. And that's why we should actually be by far more cautious with organizing these investigations for patients with chronic pain. Because, and I showed you the factors, it is caused by a complex interplay of biological factors, and this is in particular a disturbed balance between too much excitation and too little inhibition. And this is the biological cause, but that is then driven by psychological factors. What are your experiences with pain in the past? Have you had something like that before? What do you believe is the cause of the pain? How threatening is this pain to you? How much is your mood affected by it, and many others? And then come social factors. What does your family think about it? What does your partner think about it? Do they say, oh my God, you poor guy, lie in bed, I look after you? Or do they say, maybe you should go to a swimming pool and walk in water? And that will influence what you do. Culture, workplace. If you hate your manager and you have back pain, you are happy because you say, I have back pain, I don't have to go back to the stupid workplace, you know? It's very amazing. The best predictor of chronic back pain patients' return to work is not their MRI scan, not their CT scan, not their injuries. It is how satisfied are they with their workplace. Because if you hate your workplace, then back pain is welcome in some way, you know, because you have now a good cause not to tell your manager you are a stupid guy, but actually to stay at home and not to work. Financial consequences in both directions can play a role, and clearly there are cultural factors and other factors. But you see how complex that is, and it is no longer a fire alarm. Therefore, we need for these patients multidisciplinary management, and that starts with education. Because what I did today, hopefully some of you will think, oh, this is something I've learned today, and it will change the way you think about pain. And we do that with all our patients now. Education is the first step of every pain management approach. Then, paced physical activities. And that means think about something you like to do. Swimming, walking in water, cycling, walking through a shopping center, and do it paced. Set yourself a goal which is achievable and not hurting, and then extend the goal slowly week by week by week. Coping strategies, for example, mindfulness, other relaxation techniques, and there are lots of beautiful apps on your smartphones which can actually teach you these. Active are better than passive approaches. So it's very nice to get a massage. It doesn't help your chronic pain a lot. While it's very nice to put a heat pack on, it will relieve your pain for an hour, but it will not help you tomorrow. But if you instead of that do activities, it will actually improve your function and your pain will get less. And that's why there are these buzzwords in modern language, self-efficacy and self-management. So you are taking charge of your life again. You are self-efficacious, and you tell the pain, I'm not ignoring you, I'm doing what I enjoy and what I can do. So, how to start? One simple thing is, everyone needs regular exercise, even if you are not a chronic pain patient, and I'm sure you all know that. But clearly, if you are a chronic pain patient, you are very, very limited. So choose something you will like. And for example, bike riding can be very good for a lot of back pain patients because it doesn't do a lot for your back. Walking in water can be extremely good for back pain because you are weightless and therefore you have less load on your joints. Do it as you like it. Join a group, a Pilates group, a yoga class, whatever, or do it on your own. There are relatively good data that initially it's more important to increase our aerobic cardiovascular fitness than to strengthen by lifting weights or something. And the most important thing where people fail with chronic pain is that you are not pacing yourself. So you say, oh, today is a really good day, my back doesn't hurt, let's mow the lawn. But then you do the whole garden. And then it hurts like hell, and for the next 3 days you lie in bed. And what have you learned? Oh, I should have never done that. If you would have instead done 25% of the lawn today and 25 tomorrow and 25 the next day, you would possibly have done a much better job for you. And pacing instead of bust, boom and bust, is actually one of the most important problems a lot of chronic pain patients have. Now, if this wasn't enough, what I told you today, and I'm sure it isn't, but as I said, I have patients in Roy Pers Hospital, I have to go back. There are a number of ways you can get more of this information and very good tips. One is that we are actually maintaining a website called Pain Health. You don't have to write up the complete address. If you put into Google Pain Health, you will end there, and it is a whole website on tips and tricks and psychology and exercises for chronic back pain patients and other pain. You see here already osteoarthritis, neck pain, low back pain, and I've cut it. There are actually more coming. So if you are somebody who loves going through the internet, don't go through a lot of very bad chronic pain sites which tell you horror stories about back pain, but go to something which is really based on scientific evidence and, as you see, run by the State Health Department and UWA. Or if you are more into reading, there are very good books. Stephanie Davis, some of you may know, is a pain specialist here in Perth. I'm doing a lot of GP teaching with her, like tomorrow in Geraldton. She has written a very clever book, Rewire Your Pain. And it already tells you a lot. This title, if you have listened to my lecture, you will understand why it says Rewire Your Pain. It's written in a very simple language, and I think it's $20 if you order it over the web. It's pretty much the printing costs. And we recommend that pretty much to all our patients as something to take home and read and think about, because it contains much more than what I could actually tell you in this presentation. There is another one, not to advertise only one. Michael Niklas is the psychologist at the Sydney Royal North Shore Pain Medicine Center, the guy who works with Michael Cousins. I showed you his paper, and he has written one, Manage Your Pain, which is a little bit thicker, a little bit more complicated, but it has even work plans and things like that, which can be very interesting. And then there is a group of people around David Butler and Lorimer Mosley. They are actually based at the University of Adelaide, Adelaide, and they are actually running a whole education program which has the title Explain Pain. So this is an audio book as an example, but if you go onto the website, you will see they have videos, they have books, they have other material which all fits into explaining what I've tried today in a very limited time to give you as a background in much more detail. And we think that reading these things, looking at these things, is possibly one of the best pain management strategies you can apply, because once you understand what's happening, you will actually handle the situation very, very differently. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was a little bit useful and interesting, and I wish you a nice afternoon.